Hey guys, and thank you so much for tuning in to check out more and more tales to give you goosebumps. Reader beware, you're in for 10 scares. So today we are going to read Tune In Tomorrow. See you tomorrow, Elizabeth called over her shoulder. Lauren nodded. Same old time, same old place, same old stuff. Elizabeth laughed. She and Lauren always said goodbye that way. Of course, they would see each other tomorrow. They were best friends. Elizabeth hopped on her silver 12-speed bike and sped home. Every now and then, she waved to a neighbour. Everyone knew everyone in Westgate. Westgate, the typical American town. Dinner was already on the table when Elizabeth got home. No surprise there. Dinner was always on the table at 6 o'clock sharp at the Stevensons' house. Sorry, Mum, Elizabeth said as she raced in through the front door. I was with Lauren. I just spaced on the time. I don't know what you two girls talk about all day, Elizabeth's father grumbled. Boys is my guess, her mother teased. What else do 12-year-old girls talk about? Oh, Mother, please, Elizabeth groaned as she sat down at the table. She poked at her meatloaf and spinach. Baron, the family beagle, patted over and rested his paw on her chair. As soon as Mrs. Stevens looked away, Elizabeth sneaked the dog a clump of her spinach. Baron growled. He wanted the meatloaf. Elizabeth hadn't always lived in Westgate. Up until 6 months ago, she lived in Philadelphia. Then her dad took a job as chief of police of Westgate. Elizabeth had to leave her friends behind. She even had to say goodbye to Lucky the hamster that she shared with her friend Mary. Mrs. Stevens said she didn't want any rodents in the new house. It was raining when Elizabeth awoke the next morning. She slipped into a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. Then she plodded her way downstairs. Good morning, dear. Mrs. Stevens placed a tray of scrambled eggs and sausage on the table. I guess you won't be meeting Lauren today. The weather report says we're in for a major tropical storm. They are warning everyone to stay inside. Did Dad go to work today? Elizabeth asked between bites. Of course, her mother sighed. The chief of police can't stay home because of a storm. The phone rang. I'll get it, Elizabeth said. She jumped up and grabbed the cordless phone. Hey, Lauren, Elizabeth said into the receiver. Yeah, I know. My mother just told me the same thing. Oh well, I'll call you tomorrow. Elizabeth hung up the phone and scowled. Now what am I supposed to do? This place is so boring. Elizabeth's mother frowned. Maybe it would make you feel better if you wrote a letter to a friend back in Philadelphia. And tell her what? That the grass grows really slow here? Mrs. Stevens shrugged. I'm sure you'll think of something to write, she said. Elizabeth trudged into the living room. She flopped onto the couch and picked up the remote. Nothing else to do but watch TV, she told Baron. In Philadelphia, Elizabeth's parents didn't get cable. They said it was a waste of money. But here, they had no choice. You needed cable to get any channels at all. Cable was really cool. 72 different channels. Elizabeth channel surfed for a while. She didn't see anything interesting until she reached channel 6. Coming up next on Looking Toward Tomorrow, 12-year-old Elinor hears from someone she left behind, the TV announcer said. Hey, I never heard of this show before, Elizabeth muttered. A new soap? Not a bad way to spend an afternoon. Elizabeth settled back and watched the TV. A blonde girl appeared on the screen and flopped into a green velvet chair. Another boring day in this dumb old town, the TV character said. She swung her long blonde ponytail over her shoulder. Nothing ever happens here. Boy, can I relate, Elizabeth agreed. She flipped her long blonde ponytail over her shoulder. The girl on the screen was Elinor. Elizabeth liked her immediately. Elizabeth watched as Elinor got up off her couch and went to the kitchen to pour herself some fruit punch. Elinor kept looking at the clock. She was waiting for something, but what? Elinor's fruit punch made Elizabeth thirsty. She went into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of juice. Then she went back to watch the action on Looking Toward Tomorrow. On the show, a loud bell rang, the sound of a grandfather clock. She dropped her glass. Slivers of blue and white crystal shattered all over the room, but somehow Elinor wasn't hurt. Elizabeth gasped as something warm and hairy brushed against her bare leg. "Yikes!" she cried. The glass slid from her grip. Crash! The crystal shattered on the floor. Baron scooted out from beneath the couch. "Dumb dog," Elizabeth scolded. "You scared me." She bent down and gingerly picked up a piece of broken glass. Elizabeth turned back to the TV. Elinor's doorbell rang. The actress stood and opened the door. Elinor found herself face to face with a strange-looking man. His beady eyes peered through the glass storm door. His twisted smile seemed dangerous. Still, Elinor opened the door. "I'm your new neighbour, Elinor," the man on the TV said, introducing himself. He handed Elinor a pink envelope. "This letter came to my house instead of yours. Hope it's good news." "Fat chance," Elizabeth snickered. "Everyone knows letters never bring good news on soap operas." Elizabeth was startled by the ring of her own doorbell. She strode to the door and peeked through the window. A small man in a black trench coat stared back at her. He smiled through the glass. "Hey there, I'm your new neighbour, Joe Trent," the man shouted through the glass. "This letter came to my house instead of yours." The man held up a small purple envelope. Elizabeth opened the door a crack and took the letter from his hand. "Hope it's good news," Mr. Trent said as he walked away from the door. "Wow, that's weird," Elizabeth muttered to herself. "That's the same thing that the neighbour did on TV." Elizabeth took the letter back to the couch. Elinor was already reading her letter. "Oh no," Elinor exclaimed. "This is terrible." What does it say?" Elizabeth called to the TV, but the show was over. Oh well, Elizabeth still had her own letter to read. She glanced at the return address. "Awesome, it's a letter from Mary back in Philadelphia." Elizabeth's eyes shifted to the TV. This was getting kind of scary. Everything that happened to Elinor was happening to Elizabeth too. The breaking glass, a letter from a stranger. What if there was bad news in this letter too? "You're nuts," Elizabeth told herself. "It's just a coincidence." She tore open the envelope and pulled out the sheet of purple paper. "Dear Liz," the letter began, "summer here is pretty much the same as always. I went to the art museum yesterday and watched the tourists run up and down the steps like Rocky in the movies. Boy, did they look stupid." Elizabeth giggled. "Liz," the letter continued, "I know I promised I would visit you this summer, but Kathy Morrison asked me to go to her place at Jersey Shore. I hope you understand. P.S. Lucky escaped from his cage last week. We looked all over, but we didn't find him until it was too late. I buried him in the yard. Sorry." Elizabeth crunched the letter in a tight ball and shot it into the trash. The rain and wind were still raging outside when Elizabeth awoke the next day. But Elizabeth didn't mind. It was the perfect excuse for watching another episode of Looking Toward Tomorrow. The morning passed really slowly. Elizabeth watched the clock all morning long. It seemed like forever until 1 o'clock. Until Looking Toward Tomorrow. Finally, Elizabeth plopped down on the couch, picked up the remote and flicked on Channel 6. Elizabeth's mother came out of the kitchen. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Watching TV. Something called Looking Toward Tomorrow," Elizabeth replied. "Oh, Elizabeth, not one of those silly soap operas," Mrs. Stevens sighed. "These shows are all about things that could never happen," she said. "That's not true," Elizabeth insisted. "This show is very realistic." She squinted at the TV as the story started. Elinor was still sitting on her couch, exactly where she was the day before. She was still reading her letter, unhappily. Elizabeth moved to the edge of her couch. She couldn't wait to find out what Elinor's letter said. Bang! Thud! Elinor jumped up from her perch on the couch. So did Elizabeth. The offstage noise scared both of them. "Mother! Mother! Are you all right?" Elinor cried. There was no reply. Elinor raced down the stairs to the basement. The show went to a commercial. Elizabeth's heart was still pounding when Looking Toward Tomorrow returned. By this time, Elinor had made her way down to the dark basement. Soot and steam hung in the air. "The boiler must have exploded," Elinor exclaimed. "Mum, Mum, where are you?" Suddenly, the camera focused on an older woman. She was lying silently on the floor. Thick pieces of broken wood and metal covered her. "Mother, Mother, speak to me," Elinor cried out. The mother's eyes fluttered open. "Where am I?" she asked Elinor. "Do I know you?" The screen faded to black. Elizabeth laughed out loud. Only on TV, she thought, as she clicked off the TV set. Suddenly, the ceiling rumbled over Elizabeth's head. She heard a heavy thud. "Mum! Mum, are you all right?" Elizabeth shrieked. There was no reply. Elizabeth raced up the stairs to her parents' bedroom. Outside, the raging winds had knocked down an old tree. It had crashed right through the upstairs window. Elizabeth lowered her eyes to the floor. "Oh no," she cried. Elizabeth's mother was lying on the floor. A huge tree limb had fallen over her. Pieces of wood and glass covered her. Elizabeth frantically grabbed the phone and dialed 911. "Send an ambulance to 60 Fernwood Way," she said, "and hurry!" She hung up. Then she called her father. Then she waited with her mother until the ambulance came. "Don't worry, Mum," Elizabeth said as the emergency crew carried her mother out on a stretcher. "Daddy is going to meet us at the hospital." Mrs. Stevenson's eyes fluttered open. "Where am I?" she asked Elizabeth. "Do I know you?" Elizabeth had a sick feeling in the pit of her stomach. "This can't be happening," she told herself. Her heart pounded in her chest. "I just saw this whole scene happen to Elinor on TV." "Daddy, I'm so glad you're here," Elizabeth exclaimed when her father joined her in the emergency waiting room. "I'm so worried about Mum. There's something really strange going on. I've been watching this TV show and..." A nurse interrupted. "Excuse me, Chief Stevens, you may see your wife now," she said. The chief smiled bravely at Elizabeth. "Honey, why don't you go stay at Lauren's for a while?" he suggested. "I don't want you to be alone." Elizabeth nodded. She didn't want to be alone. Too many scary things were happening lately. Elizabeth left the hospital and raced to Lauren's house. She arrived, soaked and worried and frightened. "Elizabeth, what are you doing here?" Lauren asked as she opened the door. "Lauren, something weird is happening," Elizabeth said. "I've been watching the soap opera, Looking Toward Tomorrow. You know it?" Lauren shook her head. "Never heard of it. It's about a girl named Elinor. She's 12 and she hates living in a small town." "Sounds good," Lauren said, "but it doesn't sound weird." "I haven't gotten to the weird part yet," Elizabeth explained. "The weird part started yesterday. First, Elinor dropped a glass. Then I dropped a glass. Then a weird neighbour brought Elinor a letter with bad news. Then some guy I've never seen brings me a letter with bad news." Lauren laughed. "Big deal, those things could happen to anyone." "That's what I thought too," Elizabeth replied, "until today." On today's show, Elinor's mum got hit in the head and lost her memory. "Only on TV," Lauren snickered. "I thought so too," Elizabeth replied, "but then a huge tree smashed into our house and whacked my mum on the head. She's at the hospital right now and she doesn't remember who I am." Lauren put her arm around Elizabeth. Hey, your mum will be okay," she assured her. "I guess," Elizabeth shakily replied, "but I won't really know how she'll be until 1 o'clock tomorrow." "Is that when her test results come back?" Lauren asked. "No, that's when the show comes on," Elizabeth said. "That's when I'll find out how Elinor's mother is doing." Lauren stared at Elizabeth. "You really are losing it," she scolded. "No, I'm serious," Elizabeth said in a whisper. Lauren changed the subject. "You want to go shopping with me tomorrow afternoon? Only 3 more weeks till school starts." Elizabeth stared at her friend. Hadn't Lauren been listening? "I can't go shopping," she insisted. "I have to watch Looking Toward Tomorrow." "You're just upset about your mum," Lauren said, "but she'll be fine. I'm sure she will." The next day, at 5 minutes to 1, Elizabeth's father called from the hospital. "Elizabeth, are you coming here?" he asked. "Visiting hours begin at 1. Elizabeth wanted to go see her mother, but she couldn't. She couldn't risk missing Looking Toward Tomorrow. "I'll try to get there by 2, Elizabeth told her dad. "There's something I need to do first." "All right," Elizabeth's dad replied. "I'll call if there's any change." Elizabeth's hand shook as she hung up the phone. No matter what, she would not. She could not miss that show. She had to find out what was going to happen to Elinor's mother. And to Elinor. Elizabeth turned on the TV. As the show started, Elinor was at home. She paced the floor, waiting for a call from the hospital. Suddenly, Elinor was startled by a dog barking off camera. Baron barked back at the TV set. "It seems so real, doesn't it, Baron?" Elizabeth whispered, hugging the beagle. Elizabeth watched as Elinor walked slowly toward the door. Elinor laced her fingers around the doorknob and opened the door. "Oh no!" Elizabeth cried out. She watched as Elinor came face to face with a vicious, barking Rottweiler. The dog bared its long fangs. With an angry howl, it leaped at Elinor. Then the TV screen went blank. "No, no!" Elizabeth screamed. She clicked the remote frantically. The screen stayed black. Elizabeth banged furiously on top of the TV set. No picture, no sound. What had happened? A blown fuse? The TV set broken? Elizabeth had to know what happened to Elinor's mother and to Elinor. Her hand trembled as she picked up the phone and called Lauren. "Hello, Lauren," she cried. "Have you been watching Looking Toward Tomorrow?" "I tried to," Lauren replied, "but when I turned to Channel 6, all I got was static." Elizabeth hung up quickly. She grabbed the phone book. Maybe she could call Channel 6 and find out what happened on the show. Huh? Channel 6 wasn't listed in the phone book, but the phone number of the cable company was there. Elizabeth quickly dialed the number. Maybe someone there could give her the phone number for Channel 6. "Hello, Westgate Cable," the cable operator said. "How may I help you?" "Can you give me the phone number for Channel 6, Elizabeth demanded. Through the receiver, she could hear computer keys clicking. Then the operator spoke. "There is no Channel 6 on our cable system," she said. "Excuse me, that's impossible," Elizabeth insisted. "I've been watching Looking Toward Tomorrow on Channel 6 all week long." "I'm sorry, we don't have a Channel 6, the woman repeated. Elizabeth's hands shook as she hung up on the phone. She heard a lot of noise outside. Baron began barking fiercely. He raced to the front door. Feeling dazed, Elizabeth glided towards the door. She wrapped her fingers around the knob and, "Don't do it!" I shouted at the TV. My friend Lisa clicked off the set. "Doesn't she get it?" Lisa asked. "It's going to be a vicious Rottweiler at the front door." Lisa sighed. "I thought life with Elizabeth was going to be really good, but it's just another stupid soap opera." "Yeah, I agree. Why are people on TV so dumb?" Wow, that was a spooky story. Probably. But if you have been enjoying the Goosebumps stories, just know that there are a whole bunch more right here on the channel to check out. So I'd love it, really love it, if you hung around just a little bit longer and listened to one more. And if you want to hear some more spooky stories coming out in the future, definitely hit that subscribe button as well. Thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to see you back for some more leftovers. Cheers, guys.